Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C., and Happy New Year to all as we go into 2014. We are now another week closer to the mass strike of 2014, 2015. And the question is, are you ready? Do you have program, leadership, organization, and a strategy? Well, generally speaking, all of these areas are insufficient, let's say. In terms of the program, though, we do have it. The Tax Wall Street Party and the United Front Against Austerity, Tax Wall Street Party, United Front Against Austerity, have the necessary program. If that program becomes dominant, if that program becomes hegemonic, there's a good chance that a mass strike upsurge in the United States and in Western Europe, advanced countries, could bring home significant long-term historical gains. But if we allow the clowns and the poseurs and the wreckers to take over these movements, then, of course, they will fail, the narcissists. And that, of course, includes the old-style Noam Chomsky impotent commentators, and then it includes the privacy, transparency freaks, the people who think that privacy is the substance of the revolution. This is, I think, a very meager notion of what revolution might mean. And, of course, the clowns. We just saw that the French government doing everything it can to build up Dieudonné. Dieudonné with his semi-obscene, semi-nostalgic gesture, right? La Quenelle. This is now he's being shut down by the French government, right? He's being banned in some French provincial town. Wow, remember, banned in Boston used to be the greatest credential. If you could get your book banned in Boston, then you would become a success of scandal. Succès de scandale. That is what the Hollande regime is trying to do for Dieudonné. Make him the leader of whatever anti-establishment ferment there is. Guaranteed it will fail, because it can then be baited out of existence, given the obvious proclivities of this figure. Comedians that don't make you laugh are generally not a good idea. That goes for Beppe Grillo, one of the great frauds of our time, for Russell Brand, and then, of course, for people like Jesse Ventura and Howard Stern. And there are some others. There are some other people who come from this same milieu who are of goodwill, but unfortunately in somewhat over their heads. But at the present time, the main issue would be programmatic clarity. Tax Wall Street Party, United Front Against Austerity. Concerning the great issue now of the extended unemployment benefits beyond the 26 weeks or beyond this meager number of weeks that certain states are willing to pay out. The Republicans say they want it paid for. Well, hit them in the La Banza. The way to pay for it is the Wall Street sales tax, a 1% federal tax on all Wall Street turnover, stocks, bonds, and above all, the ubiquitous derivatives. And that's on notional value, friends. That's on the value of the underlying asset that's being pledged, the larger number of the two that might be associated with a derivative. This is, of course, a way to reorganize the entire society away from predatory speculation and parasitism, and in the direction of heavy-duty, capital-intensive investment for modernization, infrastructure, 30 million jobs. And these are important themes right now because we've now got Yellen. We've now got Janet Yellen at the Federal Reserve. She has been approved by the Senate. So Yellen is the new governess of the Federal Reserve. They needed a governess the whole time because of their infantilism. But Yellen is now at the Fed. And unfortunately, this morning, the Obama regime blew it again. This is really incorrigible. is, in an unbelievable gesture, the White House has put forward the name of Stanley Fischer to be the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. Vice chairman, I guess, in charge of vice. Stanley Fischer's last job, governor of the Israeli Central Bank, the boss of the Israeli Central Bank. He has worked for the International Monetary Fund. He has worked for the World Bank. He has taught, studied at Oxford, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He has been employed speculative predator by Citibank. Regime Obama, fresh from his rhetorical exercise this week that he wants to raise the minimum wage and extend the unemployment benefits for the sake of the middle class, turns to a person born in what is now Zimbabwe, right? Rhodesia at that time, British colony, just like Obama from not too far away. Or Obama's father, I guess we can say. This Stanley Fischer represents precisely the supranational speculative finance capital of the late 20th and early 21st century. Can have no idea of the drama which is experienced by blue-collar workers and by the lower levels of the petty bourgeoisie here in the United States. So I say no. I said no to Yellen, and I meant it. Yellen, of course, somebody who imbibes her doctrines from whoever is around, be it helicopter Ben Bernanke, and now apparently Fischer. Because the other interesting thing, Fischer was the teacher of helicopter Ben. And we've also got two other nominations, which we're going to look into. One is a guy called Brainard, and the other one is a certain Powell. So we'll look at those, but we expect to find them wanting, because the point of the Federal Reserve is it's not enough to come up with a name, there has to be a program. The question is, should the Federal Reserve exclusively serve the banking community? Is it a utility for the banks? Is it an auxiliary for the zombie banks and the various Wall Street hedge fund hyenas and so forth? Is that what it's there for? Or should it not act directly vis-a-vis the national economy for the purpose of dirigistic action to increase employment, go towards full employment, raise the standard of living, and increase overall national prosperity? And right now, given the sorry state of things, we see this morning the economic stagnation is, if anything, increasing. We have, I think, 75,000 jobs created in the most recent month. This is essentially microscopic. This is a statistical error. It's not significant in any way. And indeed, it may be the result of massaging or cooking of these figures, clearly, at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But the stagnation is there, and the despair is growing. More and more people dropping out of the labor force. We've got to think about developing a labor force, and when you lose those highly trained, highly experienced cadre, what are you doing to your labor force? That has got to be reversed, at least for the people who would still be able to work, people in their 50s, quite typically. That's where the experience and training seems to be built up. You lose them, you're gonna pay a terrible price. So, no to Yellen. I'm sorry, this is unacceptable, and no to Stanley Fischer. So I urge people, remember, Tarpley for Fed head. Not quite Fed head at the moment, but it could be at any time. And anyway, with Yellen, all it takes is one powerful personality in there, and then she'll follow that. And rather than follow Bernanke or this Fischer, let it be me, Tarpley for Fed head. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's our edition for the 10th of January 2014. So, Yellen is now ensconced as the chairwoman, the governess of the Federal Reserve. And now Obama has the effrontery, because this is stupidity and impudence and incompetence and corruption all rolled into one. Stanley Fischer, I'm sorry, no. And therefore, what do we need? A program, and the program is a credit facility. We've talked about, people have talked about fiscal stimulus, right? When you run a deficit, that's the one the Keynesians like. Then you can do a monetary stimulus, right? You can have easy money. Helicopter Ben has tried that. But then there's also credit stimulus, right? And Helicopter Ben knows how to do that, or he did know back in 2008, 2009. He opened about a dozen special windows, and there's one of them for AIG, Maiden Lane, which is still going. And you can get hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. At the height of it, it was about 27 trillion earmarked for those various special windows. We want the Main Street window, the infrastructure window, the Rebuild America window, the 30 million new productive jobs at union wages window. Some of these names get quite long, right? There was one called the Primary Dealer in Federal Securities window, right? We can do 30 million new productive jobs at union wages, Davis-Bacon window. That's the window we want. We want to open up a new window on this entire situation. So that's the program, and that's what the Federal Reserve could do. And it would take the form of a tender offer saying, dear governors of states, dear head of the Port Authority, do something useful, and similar authorities, right? We hear from Christie this week that New Jersey has bi-state authorities with New York, with Pennsylvania, and with Delaware. In other words, all the states that have common borders with New Jersey, they have these deals. Every one of those could benefit from 0% 100-year credit. Let them issue bonds. Let those bonds be 100-year bonds. Let the coupon rate be zero coupon bond. We've heard of that. Century bond. We've heard of that. All of this is normal practice. Maybe not all together at the same time, but still, people know how these things behave. And the invitation is the Federal Reserve stands ready to buy those bonds. And the proviso is it's got to be hard commodity, tangible, physical infrastructure. And we know the various kinds, right? Superhighways, rail, modern rail, high-speed rail, maglev rail, energy production, fusion energy, the rebuilding of ports, locks, the water systems, drinking water, sewage treatment, all the rest of that. And similarly for public buildings, schools, hospitals, universities, and so on down the line. And then money left over for your science drivers, your interplanetary exploration and colonization and production driver, your biomedical research driver to rebuild the NIH and similar operations after the wreckage of the lunatic sequester, and your high-energy physics, ITER, and the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, and every significant university should have something contributing to these programs. And with that, you get your 30 million jobs. You get a recovery. You want a recovery? I know how to do it. You put me in the Federal Reserve, I'll agitate for that, and I'll make speeches. So let's not turn our backs on the potential of this this interesting institution. Obviously, the Fed, now 100 years old, has got to be renationalized. Right? This was a coup d'etat by a clique of bankers. Goes back to 1895 when Grover Cleveland capitulated to J.P. Morgan and to London, turned over control of the U.S. public debt to London. That's the great sellout of 1895. And then about 2 decades later, this was codified, consolidated into actual law, if you want to call that a law. It is unconstitutional, but there it is. So it's got to be rolled back. The best way to do it, of course, would be all at once with a grand victory. This is probably hard to get. We haven't given up on it, but more reasonable, I think, is to begin nationalizing the Federal Reserve piece by piece on the installment plan. And the clear way to do it is this question of the credit facilities, and that's what we want to do. So the two-pronged assault for 2014, hammer away on these 2 points. The jobless benefits, the unemployment insurance, has to be extended, has to be made open-ended. Open-ended. As long as there are people who need it, they should get it. What should they do? Starve in the streets? Should they die for the sake of the Austrian school, or to carry out the twisted morality of little Rand Paul or people like this? No. It should be open-ended. So the jobless has to be extended, and if you want to pay for it, fine. The Wall Street sales tax will pay for that and much, much more. And that, of course, doesn't quite get you a recovery. It does contribute to a recovery in the sense that once you've got the Wall Street sales tax implemented, it tilts the investment decisions away from pure derivative paper speculation or electronic speculation, and then back into something productive, tangible, physical. Because remember, right now, the sales tax system and other taxes favor financial speculation, which is not taxed. And on the other hand, if it's a actual tangible physical product, you got to pay a sales tax on it. But the key to then getting the recovery going in grand style is seizing control of the Federal Reserve, nationalizing the Federal Reserve, deprivatizing the Federal Reserve. You can express this any way you want according to the audience you're dealing with, but those are the 2 points. To the extent that those 2 programmatic points become the common heritage and platform of a mass strike upsurge, that is where great historical changes of the positive type can come in. And that's what I urge everybody to work for as we go into 2014 and 2015. Now, we've also had let me just specify one thing. Concerning this extended unemployment insurance, the fascisto Republicans, reactionary, and the mainstream reactionaries and the extreme fascists are in there, of course, and they also fight among themselves. But the Republican proposal is to pay, as they say, to pay for the extended unemployment benefits by cutting the earned income tax credit. Are we nuts? If we have this destitute family in front of us, we'll say, well, we'll give you 3 months of unemployment benefits in exchange for a permanent cut in the earned income tax credit. No, we should be increasing the earned income tax credit. What? You Republicans, you talk about the wonderful virtues of work. There's no better way to illustrate the work ethic than with the earned income tax credit, because you only get that if you've got some earned income. But then you get an increase of your income thanks to the federal tax code. So that's the way that has to be done. We want the Wall Street sales tax. Back in a minute. Welcome back to Real Radio. Now, apropos what we've just been talking about, the economic depression which hangs on, the coming mass strike wave that after about 6 to 7 years of depression, and especially if there is any kind of an uptick, especially if the uptick comes in the springtime of these next 2 years, that is where labor ferment and similar struggles could break out. They need a program. But there's also then the question of where do we stand now, sort of in the historical framework. It is also, in addition to being the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve Act, it's also the 50th anniversary of the Lyndon B. Johnson War on Poverty. And if you saw any of the clips of LBJ's State of the Union address of January 1964, remember, this is a couple of months after he was catapulted into the presidency by the Kennedy assassination, you will see somebody in LBJ who was a moral giant on the domestic front compared to the Lilliputians of today. Look where LBJ is. He's way to the left of Obama. He is light years ahead of this current gang of Wall Street puppets. You got to remember, LBJ, of course, is a tragically flawed, schizophrenic personality. On the one side, warmonger and tremendous inferiority feelings because of his poor background compared to the Harvard boutique. If you want to read about that, the one good book by Doris Kearns Goodwin is her book LBJ and the American Dream. And that more or less shows how the manipulation of LBJ was carried out, right? Playing on these tremendous feelings of inferiority that he had. But at the same time, and that's, of course, what destroyed him. Right? The acceptance of the Vietnam War was what did him in, and all of his good aspirations for the war on poverty were destroyed by this Vietnam conflict. On the other hand, though, and if you go to the black community, they will tell you this, on civil rights, this was the main turning point in recent U.S. history in a positive sense, and in terms of this war on poverty. Let's just look at this, right? It's disgusting to see these reactionaries and indeed fascists coming out this week and putting out this gloating line, I guess, that the war on poverty is a failure, poverty is still here. Oh, well, it hasn't been a linear process, right? There have been ups and downs. 1964, the war on poverty started, and the idea is, at that point, it was about a quarter to a fifth of the United States in poverty, according to that definition. Now, I can't get into the definitions, where you put the poverty line and so forth, but we're just trying to see the changes in particular. For example, Franklin D. Roosevelt, in his January 1937, second inaugural, comes out and says, I see 1/3 of a nation ill-clad, ill-housed, ill-nourished. So he's saying 1/3 of the U.S. is in poverty in the middle of the Great Depression. And it had been lower, certainly, in 33 and 34, right, when you had millions of people on the verge of starvation. They had to be saved by Harry Hopkins and the Works Progress Administration. So from 1/3 in 1937, LBJ looks out and says in 64, he says it's 22% or something in that neighborhood. So between 1/5 and 1/4. The result of the various Great Society war on poverty programs was to just about cut that in half. It went down to something like 10, 11, 12%. So given the problems of measuring this, it's about a one half reduction, a 50% reduction in the existing poverty. Now, of course, as I mentioned, once LBJ had, with unbelievable folly, with insane folly, put his administration at the mercy of the warmongers, right, McGeorge Bundy and Robert McNamara, the people who were for the Vietnam War before they were against it. This, of course, meant that the guns and butter, as he used to say, guns and butter. Well, you don't get guns and butter. It's going to be guns or butter, and it turned out to be guns. So it meant that the funding of those programs declined precipitously in the late 60s, especially under Nixon, of course. Nixon went to work cutting those programs, and then during the chaos of the 1970s, under people like Ford, the decline continued, and then, of course, Carter. Remember, Carter regarded poor people welfare recipients as just another pressure group, right? He was essentially the Democratic Party that didn't understand anymore where its own base was. So that, I guess today, using some similar measure, it's about 15%. Now, again, I would not accept that. I'm sure the figure is really much higher. But you're just getting the idea. In other words, it went down markedly, and then it came up again. But it came up again as a result of Nixon and Reagan in particular. Remember that Reagan, when a homeless man froze to death in Lafayette Park across the street from the White House, Reagan came out and said, well, I can't spend any tears on this because that guy was there because he wanted to be there, right? Remember, and Reagan, with all of his racist jokes about black welfare mothers and all the rest of this stuff, right? That was the mental world of Reagan, a reactionary with racist overtones, although not expressing his racism openly, but nevertheless cherishing it as part of his part of his worldview. The difference is that some of the war on poverty is still around, most notably Medicare. Medicare is a absolutely critical way to reduce poverty, bankruptcy, destitution among people over 65. My standpoint has always been Medicare should simply be extended to everybody. The going rate for Medicare is about $110 a month, as far as I can see. And that should be extended to everybody. Medicare for all, $100 per person per month. That solves it. You need money to pay for that? Wall Street sales tax. And there we have it. Medicaid also goes back to LBJ. And the benefits of Medicaid are being extended to people in many states. But not, of course, where the governor is a fascist, like Rick Perry down there in Texas, who seems to glory in the fact that one quarter of the poor denizens of the Lone Star State are deprived of access to medical care unless they can pay for it out of pocket. Then there are some other ones, right? The Head Start, the WIC. Generally speaking, these things go back to that period of 1965 to 1968 when Johnson was able to get them through the Congress. It is an interesting question whether Johnson saved more lives on the home front than he expended abroad. Probably not, given the bombing of Vietnam. Right? With Vietnam getting up to 1 million casualties, it will probably still be some time before his balance shifts into positive terrain. And of course, it's not fair for the United States to impose this on other countries. But you get the idea. Johnson is not the monster that many people think, but rather somebody who had actual potential in a positive sense. So the war on poverty was a success as long as it was funded. And when it was not funded, like any war, it obviously then goes down the drain. So just hang on now to the Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, and other components that are the permanent heritage of LBJ. He's saving lives even today as a result of those reforms. And put that into proper perspective. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So much for domestic and economics for the moment. Just remember, the Tax Wall Street Party and the United Front Against Austerity must and will emerge this year as the overall programmatic guide for this mass strike. And if that doesn't happen, that's going to be a historical tragedy of the first water. If it turns out that the mass strike is led by Jesse Ventura and Howard Stern, you can forget it. That may be the end of civilization in this part of the world. And I could expand on that list. And if the French working class movement is led by Dieudonné, and if Grillo becomes the alternative to the regime in Italy, you can also forget civilization in those parts of the world too. This is now, world history is the world court, and this is where it's time to show who's who. Who is strong? Who is good? In contrast to Snowden, those things are not shown in privacy, but in the public arena, in the blood and sand of the bull ring, if you will, of world history. Now, we're 1 week away from the Geneva Conference on Syria. And despite this long, tragic pattern that we've seen in Syria, there are certain hopeful signs. Let me premise this by saying we are now 3 years into the Arab Spring, right? From January 2011 to January 2014, 3 years. And this is now dust, ashes, and destruction. It always was a CIA, MI6 destabilization. Saudi Arabia joined in, others joined in. The French, the DGSE, and the SDEC, they played their part. This has now destroyed governments. The goal is to destroy nations. Libya is largely destroyed. politically. Syria is physically significantly destroyed, but as long as the Assad government remains in power, it is possible to imagine the relatively rapid reconstruction of Syria. And again, if you don't like what's going on in Syria, you should take your complaints to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia, and tell them, make your mad dogs back off. Tell them to go back to Chechnya, to Indonesia, to Morocco, to Egypt, to Libya, and to all the other places where they've come from. Tell the foreign fighters to get out, go home, and hang it up. Because otherwise, we don't know what's going to happen on this front. Well, we do know that those foreign fighters, those death squads, are losing. And they have been losing now for quite a few months, since June of last year, with the liberation of that key town of Qusair along the Syrian-Lebanese border. And now, in the past week, we've had more fighting where the Islamic Front and the shards of the Free Syrian Army are fighting against the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and Sham, IEIS or IEIL. It's not the Islamic State. It doesn't say state. It says Emirate. And that gives you an idea. And remember, their idea is there's going to be a caliph at the top. That's the emperor of the world. And then there are going to be emirs running all sorts of little mini-states, micro-states, failed states, rump states, you name it. Maybe Scotland will qualify for an Islamic emirate if they stay on their course, the course that some people recommend. But now, here's what has changed. Who's going to show up at this Geneva conference? Well, Assad's representatives will be there. Moallem and others from Syria will be there. Lavrov will be there from Russia. And the question is, well, the U.S., I suppose, will be there with Kerry. He likes to travel. Good, he should go there. Who will show up for the Syrian rebels? And it's not clear anybody will. And if they don't, they have essentially turned their back on the world community. And they deserve, at that point, possible treatment. And here's the new thing. Hayden, our dear spook friend, right, from the CIA and the NSA, Michael Hayden, and Ryan Crocker from the famous State Department family, they have statements which essentially say the same thing. Assad is now the lesser evil, and it's probably time to resign oneself, I guess they would say, to the permanent tenure in office by Hafez Assad for the relevant historical future. So the Syrian Ba'ath Party of Hafez Assad will remain in power. Say Crocker from the State Department side and the spook Hayden from the CIA NSA side. Too bad if you died, huh? Too bad if you got killed before these worthies, these geniuses, got to this level of geostrategic insight, right? We knew this, God knows, in the middle of 2011, that the forces unleashed against Assad represented chaos and the destruction of civilization as we've known it. We've seen cannibalism, beheading, religious figures massacred, special attention for Christians, among others, and so forth. And when that gas attack, that gas stunt in August of last year occurred, that was the big push to get the war going, and it has, for the moment at least, failed. And right now there's zero momentum that I can see in Washington to get any kind of attack going against Syria. Although, watch out, provocations, Gulf of Tonkin, always possible, blowing up of the Maine, always possible. Now, behind all this, the Saudis, what are the Saudis going to do? The Saudis have been on the offensive in the last couple of weeks. Remember that Prince Bandar had gone to meet Putin and threatened him, very unwise, threatened Putin saying, you stop helping Assad or I will attack your Sochi Winter Olympic Games, now coming up now in February, with terrorists. I've got Chechen terrorists that I can unleash. And as tokens of what might come, we've had those attacks in Pyatigorsk, I think it was, and then in Volgograd, Stalingrad. So you're doing this in a kind of a sacral area. Again, very, very unwise. So that's one side of it. And then the other side is the Saudis have obviously decided to expand the Syrian war, right? They're defeated within the framework of Syria, defeated within the framework of Syria and Lebanon. Now they say, well, let's expand to Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq and see what we can do there. And I hope that the result will be the same, that the Saudi proxies, in other words, the death squads, the Al-Qaeda and other so-called Sunni-labeled groups, that they'll be defeated. This is now the situation, and it's going to be interesting to see what Bandar will do, because up to now, Bandar has been checkmated by Putin and Lavrov. How will he respond? And if he makes a false move, it could lead, quite conceivably, to the overthrow of this monstrous Saudi monarchical absolutist system, which is, of course, the most abominable relic of medieval barbarism that we have just about anywhere in the world. We have other things that are comparable, but they're more modern, right? They're not hereditary absolute monarchies. So there we have it. We're looking forward to Geneva. We want peace, and peace starts, as Mother Agnes Mariam has said, the start of peace is the repatriation of the foreign fighters, the armed terrorists that have come into Syria from any other place. A lot of them have come from Western Europe. A lot of these are just unemployed young men. Right? One of the prerequisites for death squads and warlords is that you got a large population of unemployed young men who don't have anything else to do. Send them home, and then peace talks could begin among the Syrians that remain. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. It's January 10th, 2014. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. The mass strike is coming, and the various regimes around the world are already adjusting their postures for counterinsurgency in many cases. When things get radicalized, when the mass strike occurs, that is when in some cases, certain factions say, well, that's when you got to put up a left cover operative. You got to put somebody who can operate under left cover and try to disarm the strike wave that way. That's one way. That's the de Blasio way. But then across the Hudson River, there's the Chris Christie way, which is get a goon, a thug, a fascist, and crush the strike wave using police powers and whatever. And that's a lot of the debate in the ruling class is of this type. I just note something that just came in, which I have not been able to investigate. There's going to be a new prime minister of the Czech Republic, and we're told that this is a leftist. Will he be a de Blasio leftist, or will he be something more serious? Will he be a puppet of Soros, or will he be a representative of the Czech labor movement? We're going to see. But the idea now is whether or not these figures are authentic, what they're responding to is authentic. And the authentic part is an increasing leftward radicalization, increasing activism by pro-labor forces, and intolerance of the antics, the impudence, incompetence, and the outrageous looting by bankers, by banksters, I guess we should say. So all of this is going on. Now, let's take a look at Chris Christie. A bridge too far. Remember Market Garden operation when Viscount Montgomery of El Alamein got a lot of people killed with his crazy antics there in Holland in the fall of 1944. A bridge too far. Well, Christie. Now remember, Christie is the tool of bankers in Manhattan, right? He goes through this this song and dance about we're from New Jersey, New Jersey, New Jersey, New Jersey. We're local chauvinists here in New Jersey. He's nothing of the kind. He is a creature of New York, Manhattan, finance capital. And they've gone from Governor Corzine of Goldman Sachs with his scandals to Governor Christie. And Governor Christie had qualified for the current job by being the lobbyist for Bernie Madoff. Remember that Christie had been a lobbyist for this dirty securities association, and the president of that securities association was Bernie Madoff, and the big effort by Christie in Trenton as a lobbyist in the capital of New Jersey was to make sure that financial frauds and financial Ponzi schemes and gyps, dodges, and deals were not included in the new legislation to protect consumers in New Jersey. So he is a stooge of finance, oligarchs, financial predators, and he's a torpedo. And this is the idea. Why would Manhattan bankers and hedge fund operators be interested in a thug and goon of the Christie type? Well, that's obviously one way to deal with a mass strike, to deal with the mass upsurges to come, crush them. And the idea, of course, is that Christie somehow, through, I'm sure through studies in the Stanislavski method of acting, he has imbibed this notion of how to look and sound like a blue-collar character and to hide the fact that you're actually working for these Wall Street bankers and hedge fund hyenas. The other thing about Christie is that he benefits, certainly through the money channels of the people that I've just mentioned, a clique of journalists, media barons here in Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, that are fascinated with Christie. They're obviously fascinated with the money of his backers, that he's bipartisan. Well, bipartisan, of course, means that Christie has been able to buy the Democratic machines, I've been told, of Essex County up in northern New Jersey, not so far from New York City, and then also the Camden, New Jersey, which is a slum right on the New Jersey side of the Delaware River. It's essentially a slum suburb of Philadelphia. So the secret of how Christie was getting all of these endorsements from Democratic mayors was bribery, but carrot and stick. So the stick might have had something to do with this bridge gate shutting down the access lanes, the local access lanes from Fort Lee and other nearby communities. There's a competing theory that what Christie was doing was targeting the state senator. In other words, it's not just the mayor of Fort Lee that we need to consider, but the state senator. The state senator is a certain Loretta Weinberg, and she was the majority leader of the New Jersey State Senate. And this was a fight about maintaining a black judge on the Supreme Court, the highest court of the state of New Jersey. And Christie was trying to force the guy out, and his antagonist in this context was this Loretta Weinberg, along with a black state senator from the same area. So there are many, many reasons for this. It's also quite possible that there was never a question, would the mayor of Fort Lee endorse Christie? Maybe that was clear from the beginning, but it's quite possible that the mayor of Fort Lee was out there campaigning vigorously for Buono, right? Buono was this orphan candidate. We followed her story, and the sad fact was that the Democratic establishment dumped her, and they did it with the help of Wall Street money and this D.C. Beltway media clique, but also of Obama, because Obama was in a symbiotic relationship with Christie in the 2012 election, and therefore Christie was anointed by Obama as a bipartisan and positive figure. So I won't go into this 2-hour press conference. It's filled with lies, distortions, omissions, posturing. Perhaps the most interesting is that Christie seems to say the main thing that has gone on here is that Christie was lied to, that the people in his entourage did not show the necessary omerta. They didn't maintain confidence on the inside, therefore they have to be fired. The main thing that happened here was that lots and lots of people were seriously inconvenienced. Some people may have died. Heart attack patients being carried in ambulances, not even across the George Washington Bridge, but in the local streets of Fort Lee and related communities. Some of them may have lost their lives as a result of this. Children were put into very difficult situations because their school buses couldn't get around. So the point is, though, the ruling class wants to have an alternative, somebody who can attempt to overawe a strike wave, but doing it not as a blue blood like Bush the Elder, not as an effete community organizer like Obama, but as a blue-collar goon and thug. And the idea is that that's Christie. Now, a couple of questions about this, right? Christie says, "Oh, I fired this woman, Bridget Kelly. I didn't want to talk to her." Well, you do want to talk to her. You want to say, who else knew about this? How did this happen? Tell me everything you know, and maybe you can save your pension or whatever it is, and so forth. A couple of more notes on this when we come back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. I'm seeing that the place where Dieudonné was going to deliver his farnetications was the Zénith of Nantes. So it means that the decree of the prefect banning the performance by Dieudonné is the new Edict of Nantes. Remember that this goes back to Henry IV, right? That it was legal to be a Protestant, to be a Huguenot, to be a Calvinist back in the late 1500s as a result of the Edict of Nantes. But this time it's going to be the Edict of Nantes is to essentially make Dieudonné into a martyr and give him influence and credibility, which he couldn't get any other way. Isn't that interesting? So don't be fooled. And remember, the clown car, the leadership will not arrive in the clown car, not in the ruling class clown car, not in the New Statesman, not in the pages of the London Guardian or similar publications. And anybody who gets on the front page of the Washington Post is not likely to be a good candidate to lead the mass strike. And these are now the issues coming up. And we're looking forward to the November election, quite frankly. The Tax Wall Street Party will be heard from in various places. And if you're interested in adding to that, send me an email. Go to tarpley.net, look at the Speakers Bureau. In there's a contact feature. You can always send me an email on that or really any other issue. I can't promise that I'll answer it, but I do try to read just about all of them. The Obama White House did something interesting. They're way behind for the week. Nominating Stanley Fischer for vice boss of the Federal Reserve is a disaster. But they did at least do the following. The White House sent out somebody from the National Security Council saying, essentially, if Bob Menendez of New Jersey, the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, wants a war with Iran, he should say so. Because Menendez is now the leader of a clique of about a dozen senators who are putting forward new draconian sanctions against Iran as a means of trying to sabotage this negotiation process. Remember, Menendez is blackmailable. Remember his sugar daddy down there in the Dominican Republic? He was down there with some guy. There was an accusation of prostitutes. God knows. So he's likely to be heteronomic in the sense of he's being directed from outside of himself on some of these issues. So, interesting thing, right? You want war? Then say so. Be good to see that on some other points. But now, the bridge too far, by comparison, right? What Christie did, by the way, has been pointed out, is much worse than these sex peccadillos, right? Because people may have died in Fort Lee and surrounding areas, right? And if you had to spend 3 or 4 hours of your day in a traffic jam created by the thug Christie and or his immediate office staff, then you would essentially have a grudge against that guy for life, and I think you'd be amply justified in doing so. So you want to ask this Bridget Kelly, this poor woman now who's been scapegoated for the entire thing, who did you work with? Because if she sends an email saying time for traffic problems in Fort Lee, and our dear friend Wildstein, Christie's best friend from high school. Now, of course, in this press conference, Christie tried to say, oh, I hardly knew that guy Wildstein. I never knew him. We went to the same high school, but it was a real big high school there in Livingston, New Jersey, I think. 1,800 kids. I hardly knew him. That's his best friend from high school, friends. And he was put there at the Port Authority for various reasons as a plum job. So remember, Baroni and Wildstein have had to quit the Port Authority, New York, New Jersey, as a result of this flap, and Kelly, the hapless deputy chief of staff, and this other guy, Stepien, who is he was on his way to be the head of the New Jersey Republican Party and the consultant for the Republican Governors Association. Once you have a pattern like this, it's obvious, right? You'd say, well, it's not just the culture of culture. Culture and Christie do not belong in the same sentence, right? But the mindset of Christie, right, this thuggery and blackmail, and of course it's what we saw, right? We've seen all these things, his clash with Mayor Fulop of Jersey City, his taking away of the security detail for former Governor Cody, and on and on. Remember there was a scandal about Christie using state helicopters to go wherever he wanted. I think to take his kid to private school, he used a state helicopter. But above all, it's his contempt, clashing with teachers. A woman asked him, why do you send your kids to private school and expect us to get by? He's been cutting education, cutting payments to old people, sick people, and so forth. There is now a United States Attorney probe of Christie. And I would say what should be probed is the Sandy money. That a lot of relief funds were made available by the federal government, as they should have been, but we've got to now entertain the possibility, given this vindictive, partisan, thuggish, goon-like, fascistoid running of his office and therefore of the state, the Sandy money may well have been redirected to grease various palms in the interest of the re-election of Christie, of course, last November. And remember, it took a designer election to get that level. I can't repeat it enough. There was one election designed to attract the friends of Cory Booker, the mayor of Newark, the black candidate, and obviously somebody with significant appeal to minorities, Democrats in general. And then a month later, there was the election for Christie and the Republicans. And when Christie says, I got a large percentage of Hispanics and blacks, it means of the ones, the few, who showed up at that second election. So this is a complete fraud. And above all, he's a union buster. If you go back to some of the interesting compilations of George Seldes back in the 1930s, we find Haywood Broun, the columnist. Haywood Broun, very widely syndicated columnist. He says, in the United States, the first way to start looking for fascists is people who go out to destroy labor, to destroy unions, to cripple the labor movement. That's where fascism begins. That's Christie in a nutshell. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now let's shift gears. Let's turn away from the fascist goon and thug Christie. Remember, this character is a formidable candidate for president because he's got all of that Wall Street money behind him, and he's got this, or had this blue-collar appeal. Obviously, he didn't care anything about the little blue-collar people there in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and surrounding areas, but that was the idea. So he's got some bird shot in his wings, if I can say that. Not that he could ever fly, but that's the idea. He went a bridge too far, and I think he's now, at least for the moment, bogged down. I expect more revelations on this front. The old Chinese water torture, drip, 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 and hopefully we can weaken him, because the other candidates, right, in particular the Rand Paul or Cruz types, are unelectable. Those are almost impossible to elect because they don't have the blue-collar, tough guy approach. They are, theoreticians. They're ideologues of Austria, the Austro-Americans, and in particular the sorry role of Rand Paul in this extended unemployment debate, where he says, I've got to cut this money off for your own good. This is now caricature of the old stories about the greed and the self-righteous hypocrisy of the rich, right? All of that has now flowed into the Austrian school. But now let's turn away from Christie. Let's turn to Bob Gates. We're always interested in Bob Gates, and now he's favored us with yet another book. This is now his memoir of the time that he was now the defense secretary under Bush and then under Obama, and it's called Duty. Very strange book. He's a very strange guy. Remember, Bob Gates is the founder of Al-Qaeda. He was the deputy director of the CIA in the early 1980s during the Reagan administration. And in one of his previous books, I think the previous one is called Out of the Shadows. And by the way, you can find this in 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA. You can also find material about Bob Gates in George Bush, the Unauthorized Biography. That's Bush the Elder. So I've got two books where I read about Gates. The earlier book, the Bush the Elder biography, we see that Gates was so dirty because of his connections to Iran-Contra that it took several tries to get him installed as CIA director under Mad Dog Bush the Elder. He was so dirty, he could not stand the congressional scrutiny. So they parked him in other jobs in the government. You should also remember, though, that before that, right, several years earlier, Gates had been the assistant of Zbigniew Brzezinski at the National Security Council. Remember, the first guy that Zbigniew saw in the morning and the last guy that Zbigniew saw when he left the White House in the evening or whenever it was. In other words, Zbignew's right-hand man was Bob Gates. Bob Gates then goes on to become a protege of the Bush political faction. And there, as we read in this interesting book, Out of the Shadows, he's the founder of Al-Qaeda. And the way he slyly puts this into his book is, we considered the creation of an Arab Legion under CIA auspices, under Saudi auspices, to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, but we decided not to do it. Baloney, you decided to do it. That is the difference. So this is a figure of the invisible government, quite frankly, right? Somebody who can be around that long in that many roles, right from the Carter administration in prominent positions all the way down to Bush the younger, and indeed to Obama. And he represents the interests of the invisible government, but too dirty to get into to get the CIA directorship the first time around, and then a joint protege of Zbigniew and Bush. Now that obviously means that's part of his staying power. Interesting with Bob Gates is his psychological approach. This is something you often find in government. It's a farm boy persona, right? A certain wide-eyed naivete, which is affected. In other words, it's a deception posture of a vicious intriguer, a vicious infighter, intriguer, and criminal type. So, what does he say in this book? Well, he doesn't like Obama because Obama is not sufficiently dedicated to the Afghan war. And of course, the Republican, the reactionary talk show guys are now going wild saying, oh, well, you didn't believe in the Afghan war, and nevertheless you sent the troops there to fight and die. Well, that's all imputed by Gates. In other words, this is what Gates says he thinks Obama was thinking. Maybe one of the interesting points is that as Secretary of Defense, Gates says his role was to manage the relation of the top generals at the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Pentagon with Obama and the White House. And in this, it's clear that Gates considers himself finally the advocate of these military types. And this is very bad because remember, what we've had in the past several years, it became obvious to the general public with Stanley McChrystal, right? His nasty comments, his staff or court, as we might say. The McChrystal crew were obviously, constantly insulting Obama, Biden, bite me. Remember this stuff, Stanley McChrystal, the stuff that got him fired. A clique, a network of subversive, insubordinate generals, in some cases putschists, generals who are ready for a putsch. And the tips of the iceberg include McChrystal, as I've just said, and then Petraeus. And we've been finding out that Petraeus was on the receiving end of an appeal from Roger Ailes, right? Roger Ailes, the principal operative of Rupert Murdoch in the United States. Roger Ailes, the boss of Fox News. He was trying to encourage Petraeus and Christie to run, I guess, as president and vice president, respectively, and promising big money. And of course, that was very unethical for Petraeus to have that conversation while he was an active duty general. But of course, we're not naive. This is what goes on. But all of those generals that Obama has fired, right? All of these people, Carter Ham of U.S. AFRICOM, Gowett, the admiral, the people from the Strategic Missile Command, from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Defense Group, General Allen, the commander in Afghanistan, who was touted to become the head of NATO, Stavridis, the admiral who was the head of NATO. All of these people had to be ousted. For what? Well, officially because of sex and money peccadillos. In reality, because they were a network of insubordinate putschists. That is the strong assumption in regard to them. And that's why Obama wanted them out. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Just a couple of more notes about Gates. We see that our dear friends, the libertarians, instinctively take the side of these warmonger putschist generals, right? Los golpistas. They think that those are the people that you got to support against Obama, of course, because they're so blinded by their hatred of Obama that they can't see what's going on anymore, right? Obama, certainly evil enough, but having no monopoly of evil and not necessarily the greater evil at any given time. Sure, in 2008, Obama, greater evil, at least in terms of the people that were contending in the Democratic primary, right? But then he's been outdistanced on the evil front by many others who, and some of these include precisely Petraeus and the clique around Petraeus. So when we see, for example, Petraeus in the spring, in February, March 2011, Petraeus comes forward and says, I'm not happy. He tells the press he's not comfortable with setting a fixed date for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And Gates is not happy that Obama starts a meeting of the National Security Council saying, I'm tired of generals popping off in the press, and I will push back hard against any delay in beginning the withdrawal. And then Obama says, if I believed I'm being gamed, ... right? Watch out or else. And Gates is so upset because he thinks that Obama, this upstart, is denigrating his wonderful friend Petraeus. So you see the idea. He becomes a spokesperson, an apologist for cliques of putschist generals and admirals, and therefore is a failure in managing that relation. His loyalty should have been to the president, but of course he says, I had no special loyalty to this president because I was a Republican holdover, and I was above party. I was above all that. I was an invisible government operative, right? A secret government operative, right? He has one authority based on his official title, and then he's got a much greater authority based on his role in this behind-the-scenes entity that most of the time you don't see. The other interesting part, the hypocrisy of Hillary. One of the reasons why Hillary Clinton must never be president is that Hillary tells Hillary tells Obama during the time Obama's president that Hillary had been against the Iraq surge of Bush in 2007 because she was getting ready to fight Obama in the Iowa primary. The overtone being that Hillary actually supported the Bush-Iraq surge of 2007 with Petraeus. We're seeing the wonderful results of that in Fallujah and in Ramadi right now. But it means that Hillary Clinton is a real compulsive liar, and even worse than liar, she's a warmonger. She really wanted that surge, right? She doesn't understand anything. And remember, she's obviously internalized this idea that as time goes on, she's got to be the biggest warmonger in the room, because if she's not, she'll be accused of being a weak woman. She'll be accused of being an emotional softy, and she's got to fight back against that. So she is ipso facto disqualified to be president. By the way, Christie, of course, must never be president based on what we've seen. Imagine what such a personality might do with the powers of the presidency, which are immense. Imagine the kind of vindictive stuff that he might pull operating from the Oval Office. And then it turns out that Obama, we read in the book, the president, meaning Obama conceded vaguely that his opposition to the Iraq surge had also been political. So they're both crypto warmongers. They both really wanted to win the war in Iraq when that was obviously impossible. And this then shows, this is the one conclusion we would agree with Gates about, to hear Obama and Hillary making those admissions in front of him, Gates, was surprising and dismaying. Yeah, what it means is the Democratic Party is a useless, hopeless instrument, and it's time for the tax Wall Street Party. Now, let's just say a few words about the World War I anniversary. Unfortunately, we got to the end of the program again. Not much time. I want to call your attention to a very interesting book published by Progressive Press of California. If you go to my website, tarpley.net, which I hope you do several times a week, you will find the cover of that book. It's La France Conquise. Now, this is a book perhaps not for everybody, but if you can read French, you should get it absolutely. It's got my essay on Edward VII, the Triple Entente, and World War I, together with this very interesting study, France Conquered, by Edward VII and his agent, Clemenceau. And this is written by a former French foreign minister, Émile Flourens. This was a good French foreign minister. He had avoided war between France and Germany during the Boulanger period, right? During the 1870s, 1880s, he had been working for peace. So this is published by Garnier of Paris, 1906, but then it went into the public domain, and 100 years later, it was republished in this form. I was the one who found it in the dusty corridors of the Library of Congress. It's also got a German pamphlet by Reinhold Wagner, the a figure close to the German General Staff. This is written in 1914 and indicates Edward VII as the greatest, the author of the greatest crimes against humanity in the 20th century up until that time. Right? This was written in the very first year of World War I. There's also some other material in there. I would urge you, if you can read French, get this. Right? It's a revelation. The clarity of this guy Flourens is striking, and the principal thing is he realizes that before World War I, that Edward VII has created the alliance system, the Anglo-French Entente Cordiale, the Entente Cordiale of Britain and France, 1902, 1903, 1904, and then the Anglo-Russian, the British-Russian Entente of 1907, 1908, which is coming. You could see it when he was writing this book. And with that, the encirclement of Germany by the hostile alliance systems. And at the same time, with this triple entente facing the triple alliance, which soon became a dual alliance of Germany and Austria-Hungary, it was a situation where any war involving a great power was extremely likely, almost inevitably, going to become a world war because of the mobilization systems and because of the dynamics of these two military alliances. Now, so take a look at that. It's on the Tarpley.net website, and you click on that, and it takes you to the page of Progressive Press where you can find this book. I think this would be an extremely healthy thing to inject, because otherwise, our dear friends, the Brand X historians, are at work, right? I think I mentioned before, Max Hastings has been on C-SPAN, and of course, as a good Britisher, he wants to repeat this bankrupt formula of the Versailles Treaty, that Germany and Germany's allies are the sole ones responsible. And my finding, of course, is quite different. Let me just also cite this Spiegel cover story, right? Der Spiegel of Hamburg, the most Anglophile news magazine in that most Anglophile of cities, Hamburg. Their story about World War I starts. This is the gem from the Spiegel essay. In the period leading up to World War I, right, 1914, this is a quote, there is little for which the British can be reproached. Yeah, there's everything for which the British can be reproached. Edward VII created the alliance system that made it a world war, and Sir Edward Grey, the British foreign minister, the protege of Edward VII, made the Germans think that Britain would remain neutral at the same time that he encouraged the French and the Russians to go wild with demand with the idea that Britain would back them up. So a deception posture that leads to the war. So we'll be talking about this in future times on the program. But take a look at La France Conquise with my essay